Hey, how's it going? This is Ryan from Trust Reviews, and this is my review of the Fujifilm X-E1. Starting off with the design, the Fuji X-E1 has the retro styling of an old film camera, which could be an important aspect as it gives the camera style and personality, all of which some people value when buying a camera, and Fuji have definitely delivered. The feel of the body is very sturdy and solid and features a rubberized texture on the front for gripping. In terms of the button layout, Fuji has gotten rid of the standard PSAM mode dial and replaced it with a dedicated shutter dial and exposure compensation dial. The aperture can be changed by the ring on the lens itself. Of course, your full manual aperture priority, shutter priority, and program modes are all there. They just require you to put the shutter dial on the camera and the aperture switch on the lens into different positions. For example, for aperture priority, you set the switch on the lens to the little aperture blade icon and the shutter dial on A. There is only one dedicated function button located on the top, which I customized ISO, but it can be customized to whatever you prefer, such as movie recording, image quality, white balance, etc. To change focusing modes, there is a little switch on the front which can be switched through single point autofocus, continuous autofocus, and manual focus. Located on the left side, there is a 2.5mm microphone input, mini HDMI input, and mini USB input. I'm not a fan of the location of the SD card slot as it is buried underneath with the battery, which can make life hard sometimes when using a tripod, for example. Also concealed on the top is a pop-up flash that can be pulled back for some bounce flash when needed. The menu layout is simple and works quite well, especially the quick access menu, which allows you fast access to other options such as custom functions, ISO, dynamic range, and white balance, which you can get to without burying yourself in the main menu settings. Most of the various other shooting modes such as continuous shooting, bracketing settings, motion panorama, and movie recording are placed in the drive menu section for reasonably fast access. Going back to the continuous shooting, the Fuji X-E1 managed to push out an impressive 6 frames per second, which is plenty for trying to capture that critical moment. Fuji's in-camera RAW conversion is very robust and extensive, letting you adjust everything from exposure by 1/3 of a stop to dynamic range, noise reduction, color space, white balance. It's all there in camera if you need it. The camera features a very high resolution 2.36 million EVF, which looks fantastic and really has to be seen to understand how clear it is. In contrast, the back LCD screen is only a 460,000 dot display, which looks good and gets the job done, but it is definitely noticeable when reviewing images. There is also an eye sensor right beside the EVF, which is very quick to respond when raising it to your eye, although I personally prefer to leave it on the EVF most of the time. The lens that came as a kit with my X-E1 is the Fuji XF 18-55mm from f2.8 to f4, which also has image stabilization built in. Fuji claims the stabilization is good for about 4 stops, and I found this to be quite accurate. The build quality of the lens is very sturdy, just like the camera body, and it provides a very versatile range from 27mm to 84mm in 35mm terms. Now to the image quality. The camera offloads 16.3 megapixel images right onto your memory card, which are very sharp and crisp with great color saturation and impressive dynamic range. Talking about the sharpness, Fuji has removed the anti-aliasing filter in front of the sensor, which in result has produced more resolving detail in images. But you might be thinking this has now made it more prone to moire. Interestingly, this is not the case. Fuji have designed what they call the X-Trans CMOS sensor, which uses a different color filter array than the conventional Bayer pattern used in most other digital cameras. For example, taking a look at this picture, which could easily produce moire on a normal digital camera and is non-existent on the Fuji image. Fuji has also added their own line of creative filters, which they call film simulation modes, which, by that very name, is supposed to mimic old film, such as Velvia, Astia, Sepia, Monochrome, and Black and White. I personally really like the Velvia simulation, as it makes the colors punchy and contrasty. The camera also features a dynamic range extender from the ranges 100%, 200%, and 400%, which gives you the ability to capture more highlights and shadows in your images. For example, shown in these pictures cropping in on the towel, which with each increase in dynamic range, it captures more highlight detail on the towel, but at the expense of an increase in ISO. Talking about the ISO, the X-E1 performs wonderfully. You get usable shots up to about ISO 3200 and even 6400 in some cases, which is just amazing for this type of camera. Very, very impressive. Focusing speed is pretty good out in bright daylight. I did, however, find to hunt a bit in lower light, but other than that, it performed well and was not a huge concern whilst shooting. Continuous autofocus works well, especially with the 6 frames per second, but I wouldn't consider the Fuji X-E1 an action camera. The motion panorama feature built into the camera is very robust and easy to use, automatically stitching the photos together in camera, also letting you choose a medium or large field of view. I'm not much of a panorama person myself, but it was fun to play around with. Battery life is rated for about 350 shots, which I found to be fairly accurate if you're not constantly checking and reviewing your shots on the LCD screen. Now we get to the video mode, which gives you a reasonable 24 frames per second at 1080p, but unfortunately no 25 or 30 frames per second options. The Fuji X-E1 produces very crisp and sharp video, very much like its stills, especially with the 18 to 55mm image stabilized lens. In video, the stabilization did make a difference. Not a huge difference, but it's definitely noticeable, especially when walking on unstable ground. When I was filming repeated patterns of fine lines, I did encounter very slight moire, but I was deliberately forcing it, so in any real world situation, it shouldn't be any huge concern. All of the film simulation modes are also available here, which look really nice, and I personally think they work better with video in some cases. Just a quick audio test with the Fuji X-E1. The camera has a pair of mics on front that can record in stereo sound, but the audio itself from the camera is not really usable for any practical sense, except for reference. You can attach an external mic to the 2.5mm mic input, and you can set manual audio adjustment, which is nice if you're going to attach a mic to the camera. The autofocus provides smooth transitions between focus points. I did find it to be unreliable at times, as it would just stall and not readjust focus, but the good news is switching to manual focus is only 2 dial switches away, allowing you to use the buttery smooth focus ring to pull and adjust focus, which would be my recommendation to use when filming. But what really lets it down is the fact that you do not have absolute full manual control over your video. For example, you have no control over the shutter speed no matter which mode you put your camera in. The ISO is also locked into automatic. Also, in aperture priority, you cannot change the aperture while recording. These small things unfortunately are a letdown for me in this camera. It does output some very enticing video, but doesn't shine due to these reasons. So essentially the Fuji X-E1 is just a smaller version of Fuji's flagship mirrorless camera, the X Pro one, but without the hybrid viewfinder, which on the upside makes the X-E1 more affordable. I personally found this camera a real joy to use, especially out in the street with the old style feel and buttons. It's a very subtle, unassuming camera and can be quite inconspicuous at times, as it's much easier to blend into your environment rather than using a DSLR. Overall, Fuji have created an outstanding stills camera, with their primary focus being on stills. As I stated before, the video is good, but I do not think it is the primary purpose of this camera. And if you're looking to buy a camera with equal ability in stills and video, I do not think that this is the best choice. But for stills, absolutely give this camera a look. Anyway, that's been my review of the Fujifilm X-E1. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give the video a thumbs up, as it really helps me out. And if you'd like to be notified of new videos in the future, please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.